Hi, my name's Kaylin. 15 years ago, my parents left me in a deserted field and drove away. No goodbye, no explanation, just dust, silence, and a lesson they said I needed to learn. They thought I'd break. But last month, they showed up at a house they didn't know I owned, my house, and when I opened the door, their faces turned pale. Now they want to talk. Now they remember I exist. But what do you do when the people who erased you suddenly want to rewrite your ending? Would you let them back in? Or would you finally tell the truth they spent years trying to bury? Let me tell you what happened. The last time my mother's voice echoed in my ear, it wasn't in person. It was a voicemail, short, hollow, laced with a sweetness she never used on me when I was a child. 15 years of silence, and now she wanted to talk. I didn't press play again. I already knew every beat, every word, and the artificial softness behind them. I sat on the edge of my sofa, phone still in hand, and let my eyes drift toward the bottom drawer of the old pine cabinet in my den. I knew what was in there, hadn't looked at it in years, but knew every detail. When I finally opened it, the smell of faded paper and wood polish hit me before I even touched the photo. There we were, my family, in a backyard I no longer claimed. Dad with one arm around Delaney, Mom laughing with that effortless tilt of her head. Me? I was at the edge of the frame, staring directly at the camera, expression blank, arms stiff at my sides. That was always my place. Not beside them, not part of the center, just tolerated. Growing up in Wren Hollow, I quickly learned that the idea of family was more performance than truth, especially in our house. Delaney was the golden child. Report cards stuck to the fridge like trophies, her name on every PTA board and church choir list. Meanwhile, I was the kid who was too quiet, too sensitive, or just not like Delaney. At 6, I remember standing by the kitchen doorway, clutching my doll to my chest, listening to Mom talking to the Carlson family from next door. I heard her laugh and say, "Kaylin? Oh, she's different. Not wired like Delaney. But we try." That stuck with me. Not just the words, but the way she lowered her voice, as if I were a subject of polite disappointment. I stopped showing them my drawings after that. I stopped trying to make them laugh. By the time I turned 10, I had figured out how to become invisible in my own home, which made what happened that summer feel almost predictable in hindsight. It was supposed to be a family bonding weekend. That's what Mom called it. We packed up the truck, tent, water jugs, canned beans, sleeping bags, and headed out to the desert about 30 minutes north. It was remote, dry, and quiet, the kind of place where even cell service gave up. I remember thinking it felt like another planet. We set up camp like usual. Delaney laid out the mats. Dad tinkered with the cooler. Mom passed around juice boxes. Then, just before sundown, Mom pulled me aside. "Kaylin," she said, kneeling so we were eye level, "we think it's time you learned how to do a few things on your own. Survival skills, okay? Like in Girl Scouts." "I'm not in Girl Scouts," I said quietly. She smiled, as if I had missed the point. "Well, that's why this is so important. You'll thank us later." They left before I could form a question. I watched the truck roll down the dusty road until it was just a blur behind heat waves. I waited. Minutes turned to hours. Night fell like a curtain, and I had no flashlight, just a bottle of water and a half-used pack of crackers. At some point, I stopped expecting them to come back. I don't remember how many hours I walked, or in which direction. I just remember my lips cracking from dryness, my legs trembling, and the surreal thought in my head. So this is how people disappear. A highway patrol officer found me by chance around dawn, walking along the shoulder in mismatched shoes. One mine, one Delaney's hand-me-down I had grabbed by mistake in the dark. He radioed something I didn't catch and gave me a look I still can't name. They took me in. The station smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. I sat on a bench while officers whispered, dialed numbers, typed reports. My name was misspelled twice in their system. When someone asked for my parents' contact information, I gave it. They called. No one picked up. Then the whispers started. Parents say she ran away. File's a mess. Doesn't add up. Kids don't end up out there by accident. I was placed in a holding room for minors. I remember watching the dust in the sunlight coming through the slats of a half-closed window. One officer handed me a peanut butter sandwich and a blanket. No one asked what I had seen. No one asked if I was scared. They treated me like a riddle they weren't sure they wanted to solve. I stayed there for 3 nights. By the 4th, someone from social services came with a clipboard and a look of mild concern. She asked if I had any relatives. Anyone who might take me in. I gave her a name. Someone they hadn't mentioned. Someone my parents hadn't spoken to in years. Mavis Aldridge, my grandmother. And that's when everything truly started to change. But before I could knock on her door, there was one more place I had to try. The cab pulled up to a familiar street, tree-lined, neat lawns, quiet like a staged photograph. I sat in the back seat, watching my childhood home grow larger through the window, until it wasn't just a memory anymore. It was real again. Too real. The social worker, Miss Carver, turned around from the front seat. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice soft, like she was talking to a wounded bird. I nodded. "I just need to see something." She didn't push. The engine clicked as it cooled. I opened the car door slowly and stepped out. Gravel shifted beneath my shoes as I walked toward the house. My house. At least, it used to be. The paint on the porch rails was still flaking, same pale blue that once chipped under my fingernails when I was 6 and told to scrape it for family chore day. I knocked once, footsteps. Then the door opened, halfway. My mother didn't step out. She didn't look surprised either. "We already explained everything to the police," she said flatly. "This is a legal issue now. Please leave." She didn't ask if I was hungry. Didn't ask how long I'd been gone. Didn't ask anything. The door closed before I could say a word. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, letting the silence slap me again. It wasn't shock, not anymore. It was confirmation. Back in the car, Miss Carver didn't say anything for a while. When we pulled onto the highway, she spoke without looking at me. "There's a Mavis Aldridge listed, maternal grandmother." "I know her," I said. "You want me to reach out?" "Yes." She scribbled something on her clipboard and made the call on speaker. A woman answered, voice scratchy with age, but clear. Miss Carver introduced herself, explained the situation, asked if Mavis would be willing to take temporary guardianship. There was a pause. Then, "I'll come get her." No hesitation, no conditions. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a different car, driving past the outer edge of Wren Hollow. We passed dry fields and old signs, some too sun-bleached to read. Eventually, we pulled into a dusty driveway outside a small adobe-style home with a metal rooster nailed to the fence. The screen door squeaked as Mavis stepped out, wiping her hands on a dish rag. She didn't say much, just looked at me for a moment, then gave a small nod, like she'd already made up her mind long before I arrived. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she said, ushering me in, "but you'll sleep safe here." Inside smelled like thyme and something baking. A simple kitchen, a small living room with a crooked lamp, a shelf full of old mystery novels. It was a quiet house, but not empty. There was a difference. That night, she made stew. No speech, no awkward questions, just a bowl, a spoon, and a soft eat. I didn't even realize how hungry I was until halfway through. The bed in the guest room was too soft. I couldn't sleep at first. My thoughts jumped from place to place. My mother's face at the door, the officer's shrug when they logged me in, the click of the lock turning from the inside. Eventually, I got up and wandered through the house. Mavis was in the living room, writing a letter by hand. She looked up but didn't ask why I was awake, just pushed a folded blanket toward me and said, "Sit if you want." We didn't talk. She wrote. I watched. Her pen moved slow, like it had nowhere urgent to be. The next morning, I followed her outside. She had a small garden behind the house. Nothing fancy, just tomatoes, herbs, some struggling roses. I didn't ask to help. I just started pulling weeds next to her. That became our rhythm. She never asked for stories, and I never volunteered them. But we shared things: breakfast, radio stations, the occasional crossword puzzle, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't being watched for cracks. One afternoon, I picked up a book from her shelf, an old paperback with a faded cover. I didn't read it to escape. I read because I wanted to understand. The words were heavier now. They stayed longer. Later that week, I found an empty notebook in the drawer next to the couch. I started writing. Not about them. Not yet. Just thoughts. Lists. Observations. Sentences with no home. On the inside cover, I eventually wrote, "I may not have roots, but I can still grow." The garden soil under my nails was starting to feel less like dirt and more like something earned. After that day in the notebook, I started moving differently. Not faster, just with a kind of quiet focus. I didn't tell Mavis I'd decided to find work. I just woke up earlier, packed a snack, and walked to the diner off Main Street to ask if they needed help. They didn't ask about my age. They just handed me a stack of plates and told me to start wiping. I stayed quiet, worked hard, and by the end of the week, they gave me a schedule. Morning shifts, prepping, washing, running back and forth. It wasn't glorious, but it was mine. Between shifts, I started folding newspapers for the town route. That paid in quarters and blisters, but I didn't care. Every envelope with my name on it made me feel like I existed in ways that no family photo ever did. I used the money to buy a used phone off a guy at the laundromat. It had a cracked screen, half the storage gone, but it worked. I also started walking to the library on my days off. I didn't tell anyone why, but the truth was simple. I was going to get my GED, with or without applause. While other girls at school posted selfies in new clothes or snapped weekend pics with friends, I had spreadsheets and receipts. And surprisingly, I didn't feel sorry about it. There was a weird freedom in not owing anyone an explanation. When kids whispered in class about how I wore the same jeans 3 times a week, I didn't flinch. I didn't need their approval. I was too busy building. It was during a weekend shift at the laundromat that something changed. The owner, Ray, had been struggling with inventory for months. Towels were disappearing. Detergent stock kept running low. One day he muttered, "Wish I could keep better track of this crap." Something about the way he said it stuck with me. That night, I opened my borrowed laptop and pulled up a basic spreadsheet tool I'd learned to use at the library. I created a template, color-coded tabs, added simple formulas. It was ugly, but functional. The next day, I showed it to Ray on my phone. He squinted. "You made this?" I nodded. "Hell," he said. "Can it print?" Within a month, 3 other small businesses on the block were using the same tool. Modified, of course, but built from that same skeleton. That was the moment I realized I didn't just work. I created. It wasn't long after that I started spending my evenings with tutorials, forums, and user guides. I barely understood half of what I read, but I kept going. Persistence became its own kind of language. On my 17th birthday, not that anyone remembered it, I sat at Mavis's kitchen table with a warm mug of cocoa and opened my laptop. It took 2 hours, a minor breakdown, and 1 accidental site crash. But eventually, I registered my domain. A one-woman LLC. No balloons, no cake. No one to hug me and say, "Happy birthday." But for the first time, I had something with my name on it that no one could take away. I didn't tell Mavis right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because it felt like holding a baby bird in my hand. I didn't want to expose it to the wind just yet. It wasn't pride. It was protection. Late that night, after she went to bed, I opened my notebook and flipped past the list of goals and scribbled thoughts. On a clean page, I wrote 1 sentence. I don't know what this is yet, but for once, it's mine. After a few weeks of running my little startup quietly from Mavis's kitchen table, I started building routines I could rely on. Coffee at 6, emails by 7, research until lunch. It felt like laying bricks under my own feet while walking forward. But even with the momentum, I still didn't expect the email. It showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, buried in a flood of client inquiries. The subject line was impersonal. New property alert, 822 Marlin Street. I nearly ignored it, but something about that address tugged at a place in my gut I'd thought had long gone numb. I clicked. There it was. My childhood house, same chipped siding, same front porch with the uneven step. But this time, listed as foreclosure pending, bank-owned, auction in 30 days. I stared at the screen for longer than I want to admit. Not because I was sad, those years had already dried up inside me, but because something colder replaced them. Not grief, not even anger. Control. I copied the MLS number into a private file and closed the tab. No flinching, no nostalgia, just math. That evening, I called my attorney. Not the firm, just Elise, the one who handled quiet things. I gave her the property details and said, "Set up a holding LLC. I want that house. No trace back to me." She didn't ask why. She'd worked with survivors before. A week later, I visited the property just after dusk. I parked a block away, walked along the sidewalk like any stranger might. The lawn was overgrown, a few shingles scattered near the gutter. One of the front windows was boarded. The mailbox hung crooked, stuffed with unopened letters. Junk mail, a utility shutoff notice, an envelope from the Department of Revenue. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Standing there, I thought, they let it rot, just like they did with me. By the following Tuesday, Elise had closed the deal. The documents came through encrypted. I signed from my office, my logo visible in the corner of the screen. But no one at the bank would ever know my name. The deed arrived by courier. I opened it slowly and placed it in the drawer next to the photo I never fully had the courage to throw away. The one where I was 6 and standing too far from the rest of my family. "Now it's mine," I whispered. "Legally, financially, historically." I didn't toast. I didn't call anyone. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Still, I couldn't let the house stay as it was. I called a contractor I trusted. Small team, good work, discreet. I told them to focus on safety and structure. Nothing cosmetic, no repainting, no new tiles. Just stabilize the bones. We kept it minimal. Removed the moldy carpet. Replaced termite-ridden floorboards. Secured the roofing. I told the team to leave the porch light as it was. Yellowed, flickering, faintly buzzing. One morning, I stopped by while the crew was on a lunch break. The smell of sawdust and old wood filled the air. I walked the perimeter, hands in pockets. That place had held so much silence, so much pretending, and now it answered to me. I didn't tell Mavis about the purchase, not yet. She would understand, but I needed it to exist without commentary. Some things had to be reclaimed in private. A few days later, I returned again alone, early enough that the sky was still rinsing out its night colors. I stood on the lawn, watching one of the workers pry up the porch planks, each pull a kind of exorcism. When he noticed me, he asked, "You want to keep any of this old wood?" I shook my head. "Let it go." He nodded and went back to work. I stayed for a while longer, long enough to see the debris piled beside the sidewalk, bits of the past laid bare for anyone to walk past and not even notice. I didn't. By the end of that week, most of the renovation crew had cleared out. The air inside the house didn't smell like mildew anymore. It smelled like nothing, and that felt right. I walked room to room one morning, barefoot on new floors, trying to remember which corner had once held the bookshelf my father refused to let me touch. Where the old dining table used to sit, the one they never made room for me at during holidays. It was all gone now, erased. Except the bones. The bones stayed. I had just finished setting a tray with 2 mugs of chamomile, out of habit more than intention, when I saw the SUV roll up. Dark gray, polished, clearly leased. The kind people drove when they wanted you to know they were doing fine. even when they weren't. 3 doors opened. My mother stepped out first, her posture stiff like she was walking into a courtroom. My father followed, slower, gaze down, keys still in hand, as if unsure whether to lock the car. Then came Delaney. Perfect posture, perfect hair. The same icy smile she wore at 13 when she told me no one wanted me at her birthday sleepover. They didn't knock, just walked toward the porch like it still belonged to them. I didn't meet them outside. I stood inside, behind the window's sheer curtain, letting them guess if I'd answer. I opened the door without a word. My mother blinked first. "We didn't realize the bank sold it already," she said, the kind of tone reserved for complaints at customer service counters. I stepped back slightly, just enough for them to enter. "They did," I said. "To me." The words didn't land right away. It took a few seconds for my father's eyes to scan the hallway, the repainted trim, the absence of family photos. "You bought it?" he asked, like I'd said I'd robbed a bank. "I did," I replied, calm even. "Legally, quietly, permanently." No one sat until I motioned to the living room. The furniture was neutral, clean, modern, not inviting. That was on purpose. I brought out the tea tray and placed it between us. No sugar, no cream. Delaney took in the room with a quick sweep, eyes pausing on the bare mantel. "It looks different, feels bigger." I kept my gaze steady. Things grow better when they're not starved. My father shifted in his seat, forced a smile. "We always knew you'd do well eventually, Cale." That name. No one had called me that in over a decade. It slid off his tongue, like he still had rights to it. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to my mother. "Why are you here?" She looked at Delaney, who cleared her throat like she'd rehearsed. "We thought maybe we could talk, figure out a way forward." I waited. "Maybe this house could bring us back together," she added. "It's where it all started, after all." I gave them a long, quiet look. Then, slowly, I folded my hands on my lap and said, "Let me be clear, I didn't invite you. You came here assuming something was owed." Delaney's lips tightened. "That's not what we're saying." My mother jumped in. "We're family. Blood matters." I leaned forward just enough to be heard. "If you're here for money, you should leave. If you're here for clarity, I'll pour another cup." No one moved. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. Delaney's fingers curled around her mug, but she didn't drink. The air thickened with the kind of silence only history can create. No yelling, no slamming doors. Just the sound of everything unspoken pressing against the walls. They didn't walk out angry. They walked out calculating. 3 days later, an email landed in my inbox. The sender? Delaney. The subject line. "Thinking of you?" That alone should have told me it was a trap, but I opened it anyway. There was a photo attached, me, about 5 years old, in a sun hat too big for my head, sitting next to Delaney on a faded picnic blanket. I don't remember the moment. Judging by the tightness in my smile and the way my arms were pulled into myself, I probably didn't enjoy it. The message beneath was short, almost sweet. "Dad's business is struggling. We hoped you might want to talk. You know, as family. Maybe this is the time to come back together." There was no apology, no, "we were wrong." Just a sentence wrapped in sentimentality, a pitch dressed like a memory. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to my assistant, Emily, and asked her to pull financials, anything she could find publicly on my father's company. I told her to look for anything on Lorraine and Delaney, too. She didn't ask why. Emily had seen enough to stop wondering. That afternoon, while I waited for her findings, I walked downtown and ordered a coffee. I sat by the window, stirring it too long, thinking about how quickly they moved from silence to expectation. Not once had they asked me how I survived. But now that things were falling apart, I was suddenly worth remembering. Emily called later with the facts. "His insurance firm is practically bankrupt," she said. "Multiple missed filings, overdue taxes. Your mom's condo? She pulled a second mortgage last year. It's bleeding. And your sister. You'll love this. 2 civil suits pending. Fraud and misrepresentation. One's from a former client. The other? A friend. I let out a breath, then said, "Print it. All of it." By the next day, I had the folder in hand. I didn't need this for satisfaction. I needed it for clarity. I chose a small restaurant in Wren Hollow to meet. Neutral ground, public, controlled. I arrived early and sat at the back, ordered water, and placed the folder on the table like a quiet threat. They showed up together. Lorraine wore a shawl, her version of looking fragile. Rhett looked older than I remembered, more tired than apologetic. Neither hugged me. "We're glad you came," my mother said, like she was inviting me to a brunch I hadn't RSVP'd for. I slid the folder across the table without a word. They exchanged glances, flipped through a few pages. Delaney didn't bother hiding her frown. "I know what you need," I said finally. "But I also know what I won't do." My father tried the soft approach. "We took care of you. We did what we could." "No," I interrupted quietly. "You left me in the desert. Now you're drowning. And you want me to throw a rope." Delaney's voice cut in. "You're being dramatic." I turned to her. "You're being entitled." My mother stiffened. "Family means stepping up, whether we're perfect or not." I leaned back. "Family means not watching someone disappear and pretending you didn't see it." They didn't argue after that. Not really, they just sat there. And after a few awkward bites of salad and forced pleasantries, they left. No hug, no closure. Just the same exit I remembered from every dinner I wasn't invited to as a kid. That night, I got the notification. Lorraine had posted a status on Facebook. Just vague enough to avoid naming me, but clear enough for anyone who knew us. Raised a daughter alone. We gave everything we had. Now she won't even help us save our home. The post started picking up likes, sympathy comments, old friends chiming in with, "You were always so strong," and "Kids today have no loyalty." I stared at the screen. Not angry, just alert. I didn't reply. I didn't comment. I didn't block her either. I printed the post. Then I pulled out another folder and added it to the pile. If they wanted to start a campaign, they'd learn I wasn't the girl who needed to be rescued anymore. They didn't ask for help. They demanded gratitude. That's not the same thing. By Thursday, the post had been shared over 300 times. I hadn't realized how many people still kept tabs on the Gaskills. Old neighbors, church acquaintances, people who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions again. The comments ranged from gentle disappointment to open condemnation. "She was always a handful." "Some people forget who raised them." "Guess money changes everything." At first, I ignored them. I kept my head down, my calendar full. But on Friday morning, right in the middle of a quarterly strategy call, Emily slipped a printed article onto my desk. Her expression warned me before I read the headline. Daughter of the Year, CEO leaves aging parents homeless. It wasn't just a blog. It was syndicated across 3 business gossip sites, and had already made its way onto LinkedIn and Twitter. My face, my title, and a photo of the house I had bought, cropped just right to look cold and corporate, were now part of a story I hadn't written. I paused the call, asked the team to reconvene in an hour, and sat alone in my office. The skyline outside looked too clean, too distant. I read every word of the article. They quoted Lorraine, my mother, without naming her. A close family source. That was the mask she always wore best. I forwarded the link to legal, then, slowly, to my PR rep. An hour later, I was in a meeting room with Nicole, my communications manager, and the firm's outside consultant. They danced around the topic with words like optics and narrative opportunity, but I already knew what they were going to suggest. "You could issue a statement," Nicole said carefully. Not defensive, just clarifying. I stared at her for a moment. "You want me to explain to strangers why I didn't rescue the people who left me in the middle of nowhere?" Nicole shifted. "You don't have to tell the whole story. just enough to show you're not cold. I leaned forward, voice steady. If someone thinks I'm cold because I stopped being quiet, they were never listening in the first place. I didn't issue a statement. I started preparing a live stream. The next morning, I walked into the small video studio in our office tower. Just me, a single camera, and a simple title card, Kaylin Monroe. Live. No production team, no filters. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted the record to breathe. I looked directly at the lens and began. 15 years ago, I was left in the desert. Not figuratively, not poetically, literally. I told them everything, not with tears, not with a breaking voice, but with dates, documentation, names. I showed photos, my intake form from the police station, a time-stamped photo of me walking barefoot along the highway, school attendance reports, letters from social workers. I displayed it all like pieces on a courtroom table, and then I read the Facebook post. I didn't name Lorraine. I didn't need to. Everyone had already connected the dots, but I followed with a statement that had been sitting at the base of my spine for years. I didn't humiliate them. I remembered what they wanted me to forget. After I ended the stream, I walked out of the studio and into my office. Emily had already pulled up our analytics dashboard. Thousands watching live. Tens of thousands already resharing. Some of the comments were brutal. She's using trauma to build her brand. Why now? She's still her parents' child. Where's the grace? But others cut through the noise like a clean breath. My mother did this to me too. Thank you for saying what I never could. You didn't ruin their image. They handed it to you. That night, I didn't sleep much. I read every comment, every message. I didn't respond to any of them. Not out of apathy, but because sometimes being heard was enough. You don't always need the last word, just the first one they can't ignore. By Saturday, sponsors who had ghosted us quietly returned. 2 journalists reached out requesting full interviews. I declined. This wasn't about a story. This was a statement. Sometimes telling the truth doesn't set you free, but it makes silence impossible. Monday night, long after the office lights dimmed and the streets below quieted, I was still at my desk. The hum of the old building's heating system kept me company while I sifted through archived folders my assistant had flagged. I hadn't gone looking for vengeance. I went looking for proof. It arrived via encrypted file transfer. One of the private investigators I'd quietly hired months earlier had finally cracked a database tied to regional traffic camera archives. I'd nearly forgotten I'd asked for it. I clicked the folder. Inside was a single image, black and white, grainy, stamped with a date 15 years ago, just after sunset. A little girl, small in frame, walking down a deserted highway shoulder, with one shoe missing. Wind catching the hem of her oversized shirt. Her head turned toward the road, face unreadable, but posture screaming abandonment. It was me. I didn't blink, didn't cry. I forwarded the photo to my legal team with 6 words. Attach this to the public file. The next morning, I arrived early. While the team handled their usual tasks, I sat in my office and reviewed every item we had on record. Police reports, intake forms, housing records, old email correspondences. There were gaps, but now I had the image that made all their words collapse. Around noon, another update hit my inbox. This one came from the forensic IT analyst I'd hired through my startup's security vendor. They'd traced a malicious email sent 5 years ago to my university's scholarship board. The message accused me of falsifying records and manipulating faculty, claims that ultimately led to my funding being revoked just before graduation. Attached was a digital trail, IP address, timestamp, and access route. It linked back to a domain Delaney had used during her legal internship in Chicago. I didn't forward this one to press either. I downloaded it, saved it as a PDF, and sent it directly to Delaney. No subject, no message, just the file. 20 minutes later, her name popped up on my phone screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I powered the phone off and slid it into the drawer. That same afternoon, While walking to my car, I was handed an envelope by a process server standing near the lobby. Cease and desist. Lorraine's lawyer. They accused me of public defamation and misuse of family information for personal gain. They wanted me to take down my livestream, retract the documents. Cease further discussion of private family matters, the letter said. I handed the packet to my in-house counsel. He raised an eyebrow. Response? They had 15 years to speak, I said. I'm just catching up. We didn't countersue. We didn't escalate. Instead, my team posted a public document repository, available through a link in my company's press portal. It wasn't flashy, just facts. A school record showing repeated absences due to unspecified family reasons. An emergency room intake form from when I was 12. Bruises down my ribs listed as fall-related. An anonymous email chain targeting my scholarship. The photo of me walking the highway alone. No captions, no commentary, just receipts. We pinned it at the top of my LinkedIn and company website. Some called it excessive. Others called it brave. But I wasn't aiming to please anyone. This isn't about family, I wrote in the final line of the statement. It's about harm, and I won't let silence be a co-conspirator again. The fallout came in layers. Some clients backed out, not wanting drama. But newer, bigger clients signed on, citing my transparency and tenacity. A journalist emailed me asking if I planned to write a memoir. I said no. Another asked if I'd do a podcast interview. I said nothing. And still, the downloads on the public file kept rising. I didn't need revenge. I needed the record corrected, for me, and for the girl they left behind. The noise faded the way winter wind does after it's torn through a valley, slowly, without apology. No more headlines. No more anonymous comments. Just quiet. And in that stillness, she, the girl on the side of the road, stayed with me. She never left, not really. But now she wasn't begging to be heard. She just stood beside me, silent and undefeated. It was a week before Christmas, when I walked through the town square in Wren Hollow. The lights were already up, plastic candy canes staked into the grass, strings of yellow bulbs blinking lazily overhead. A local jazz trio played near the cider booth. I passed a vendor I used to fold papers for. He didn't recognize me. Or maybe he did, and just chose not to speak. That didn't hurt the way it once might have. I didn't expect warmth from this place. I didn't even want it. Across the street, a woman handed her daughter a bag of kettle corn. The girl laughed, the kind of unfiltered joy I used to envy. Now I just observed it, like someone watching a train pass they didn't need to board. I walked by the house, that house, on my way back to the car. Not because I wanted to see it, but because it was on the route. It looked clean, settled. Someone else had bought it. I'd sold it through a trust under another name. Never told Mavis. Never explained. There was nothing left for me in that house. Not a single piece of furniture. Not a shadow. I didn't stop walking. By January, the article had disappeared from the front page of any feed. Google alerts slowed. People moved on. But the impact lingered in quiet ways. A stranger thanking me at a conference. A handwritten note left at my office door from a young intern. Your voice helped me find mine. I didn't frame it. I didn't post it, but I kept it. When a news outlet reached out to ask if I'd let them film a feature, a powerful story of healing and reclamation, I declined. There's a difference between being witnessed and being showcased. My company found its rhythm again. Staff morale was higher than ever. When we landed a new international contract, they brought in cupcakes and balloons. I clapped with them, I smiled. But inside, I knew I had climbed something they would never see the peak of. Then came the envelope. Cream-colored, handwritten address. No return sender, but the script was familiar. Inside was a letter from Lorraine. Not an apology, just a retelling, a soft spin of things. We tried our best. You were difficult. It was complicated. We were scared. A curated mosaic of reasons. I read the first page. That was enough. I didn't rip it. I didn't burn it. I wrote back one sentence on a blank note card. I forgave you a long time ago, but I won't walk backward to prove it. I mailed it without expectation. That night, I sat on the rooftop of my apartment building with a blanket around my shoulders and a mug of tea in my hands. The city was quiet below, speckled with lights like a circuit board stretching into the horizon. Mavis called at midnight. Her voice was the same as always, dry, warm, practical. She didn't ask about the article or the video. She asked if I'd remembered to buy rock salt for the front steps. We talked about tomato seeds, weather patterns, a new book she'd read. Neither of us mentioned the past. That was the most peaceful part of all. Sometimes justice doesn't look like someone being punished. It looks like distance. It looks like not explaining anymore. It looks like peace. I didn't return for revenge. I rose so they'd have to look up. Before I end this story, let me share something, just between us, from one soul to another. I used to think justice meant getting an apology. A moment, a headline, something loud and clear that says, "You were right all along." But as life often teaches us, justice doesn't always come wrapped in noise. Sometimes it looks like walking away without bitterness. Sometimes it means choosing your peace over their approval. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about releasing yourself from the weight of what they'll never take responsibility for. If you've ever felt invisible, uninvited, or underestimated, I hope my story reminds you of this. You don't have to return to the fire to prove you've survived the burn. Your story is not defined by who failed you, but by who you chose to become despite it all. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who never truly saw you? Do you believe forgiveness has to involve reconciliation? Or maybe you've stayed silent for too long and you're finally ready to be heard. Let's talk about it in the comments. If this story spoke to you, even just one sentence, drop a 1 below or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if you didn't connect with it, that's okay too. Let me know why. Your voice matters here. If you'd like to hear more true stories that carry weight, heart, and lessons learned the hard way, don't forget to subscribe. Every story I share is meant to speak to the parts of us that don't always get a spotlight. So if you're still here, still listening, thank you. You're not alone. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter. I'll see you in the comments.